I'm Evelyn Harper, and after 25 years of building the backbone of a billion-dollar tech firm, I found out I was replaceable in less than 5 minutes. It happened on a Tuesday just after lunch in a boardroom filled with people who used to rely on me for everything. The moment I walked in, I knew something was off. The room was too quiet, too staged, and sitting right in my usual chair was Madison, the CEO's niece, barely out of college, already wearing a company badge like she earned it. She didn't even stand when I came in. Just crossed her legs, it tilted her chin, and gave me that smile. The one who said she already knew how this was going to end. I stood there for a moment, waiting for someone to say something that made sense. Then Marcus, our CEO, cleared his throat and set it straight. "You're finished here, Evelyn. 25 years is long enough." Just like that. No preamble. No thank you. Not even eye contact. I heard the words, but my brain didn't process them. Not right away. I looked around, expecting anyone to speak up. No one did. Most of them avoided my eyes. A few kept staring down at their laptops as if they typed hard enough they'd disappear. Marcus kept going like he was reading from a script. Something about clean exits and HR handling the paperwork. I didn't catch all of it. I was too busy trying to keep my face from cracking. Madison leaned back and tapped her manicured nails on the table. She looked bored, like my life's work was a mild inconvenience before her next selfie. The badge that used to hang from my neck now dangled from hers like a trophy. I sat down more from reflex than choice. The folder Marcus slid across the table looked heavier than paper had any right to be. Inside were the separation documents. His signature was already stamped at the bottom, as if my consent was just a formality. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. What could I say that wouldn't sound pathetic? That I gave them everything. That I canceled holidays, skipped birthdays, and lost a marriage because I believed in this company. It wouldn't matter. To them, I was just done. Erased. Madison was their shiny new replacement. Young, connected, photogenic. She had never spent a night fixing code at 3 a.m. or fought to recover from a global logistics crash, but she had the right last name, and apparently that was enough. I stared at the pen for a long time. Marcus thought I was hesitating out of grief. He didn't realize I was calculating, because what he didn't know was that he had already lost control the moment he signed that paper. Still in that room, at that moment, I felt small. Not because of who I was, but because of how easily they discarded me. And worse, how easily everyone else let them. The silence in that room was worse than any insult. No one defended me. No one questioned it. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being rewritten like I'd never mattered, and the person doing it wore designer heels and posted about hustle culture between takes of her oat milk lattes. I stood up, picked up the folder, tucked the pen in my bag like it was just another meeting I had to survive. I didn't cry, not in front of them, but inside something broke and something else woke up. Because even as Marcus smiled and Madison adjusted her blazer for her LinkedIn post, I knew the truth. They had no idea what they'd just done. They didn't fire a woman. They fired the very system holding the company together. And I was going to let them find that out the hard way. There was a year my son turned 9 and I missed his birthday because a client server in Singapore crashed 2 hours before the cake was supposed to be cut. I sent a video message from a glass conference room across the world, hoping my voice could make up for the fact that I wasn't there to light the candles. He smiled on the screen, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. There were holidays where I sat in an airport lounge laptop, balanced on one knee, pretending it was just another flight delay. I told myself the next break would be different, that I'd unplug just once. But there was always a rollout, a deadline, a crisis that couldn't wait. I remember one December when I didn't see daylight for a week. I left home before sunrise and got back long after the city had gone quiet. My apartment felt like a storage unit, just a place to rest my feet between meetings. Once I collapsed at my desk after 3 nights without sleep. I thought it was a panic attack, but the ER doctor called it a warning shot. Exhaustion layered on top of stress like bricks on my chest. Even then, I answered emails from the hospital bed, one hand hooked up to an IV, the other scrolling through project timelines. I told myself I was essential, that everything would fall apart without me. I think part of me needed that to be true. My marriage didn't survive the job. My husband once told me I gave more to the company than to our home. At the time, I argued. Looking back, I think he was right. I missed parent-teacher nights, last-minute school projects, and quiet dinners that never happened. I made peace with it, or at least I thought I did. Because I believed that sacrifice was the price of security, but no one ever saw those sacrifices. They saw the results, the growth, the clean launches, and the record quarters. They didn't see the toll it took to make it all happen. And when it was time to let me go, none of that mattered. Not the missed birthdays. Not the hospital visits. Not the years I traded in. All they saw was a new face, and they wanted more. And that's the part that still stings. There was a night when a single late shipment from Taiwan set off a chain reaction across 3 continents. By the time the panic reached our headquarters, I had already been on the phone with 4 different time zones, redirecting cargo, reprogramming allocations, and buying us 12 crucial hours. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. No press release mentioned my name. No executive gave a speech about the quiet woman in the server room at 3 a.m. They just celebrated the numbers, never the person holding them together. I was the one who built the internal redundancy system after our first near blackout in 2011. The one who saw that relying on third-party databases without internal controls was a ticking time bomb. I fixed it before it ever made the news. When our European partners threatened to walk away over integration delays, I flew to Munich with a week's notice, sat across from the CIO, and rebuilt trust line by line. That contract alone saved us tens of millions over 5 years. No one asked how we kept the European market. They just assumed it had always been stable. I trained teams in 3 languages. I wrote documentation from scratch. I was the emergency call when no one else answered. I carried a second phone just for vendor alerts, because sometimes issues didn't wait until morning. Our cloud migration strategy, I authored it, the Global Logistics Tracker. My idea built on napkin sketches during a red-eye flight back from Tokyo. Most people thought it just appeared one day like magic. Even the platform Madison now posts her status updates from, I helped build the security layers that keep it safe. She doesn't even know what 2-factor gateway we use, but she's the new face of innovation. I never cared about credit. I cared about resilience, reliability, and making sure no client ever saw us sweat. That was my pride. Not the title, not the office, just knowing that when things broke I could fix them. But in the end, none of it was visible to the board. Not the patches I wrote, the trust I built, or the fires I put out before they could catch. I was the infrastructure no one looked at. Until the day they decided they didn't need it. It was years ago, during a particularly tense negotiation with a partner in Seoul, that the idea first came to me. We had narrowly avoided a disaster thanks to a patch I'd written in the back of a taxi, and afterward, I sat in the airport lounge thinking about how fragile the whole structure really was. Not the tech, the trust. Back then, Marcus still called me by my first name, still said things like, "You're the heart of this company." I knew better than to believe it fully. Loyalty in places like this only lasts as long as you're useful. So I drafted something, a clause buried deep in a licensing addendum far beneath the usual noise. It was clean, airtight, and quiet. If I were ever removed without cause control of all operational patents and rights would revert to me. It wasn't spite. It was survival. A backup system for the one person no one thought would ever need protecting. I had it reviewed quietly by someone I trusted outside the company. Every word was chosen carefully, not just to protect me, but to ensure there were no legal cracks for anyone to slip through later. The timing was perfect. We were onboarding 3 new partners, and the executive team was too busy chasing expansion headlines to notice a single extra paragraph in a sea of paperwork. When it landed on Marcus's desk, he didn't blink. I remember the day he signed it. He was in a rush, about to catch a flight jacket already slung over one arm. He didn't even read the last page, just smiled at me like always, like we were still in this together, and scrawled his name in permanent ink. I stood across from him, calm, watching the pen glide across the page. That was the moment I stopped believing I'd be protected by loyalty. I realized then that if they ever turned on me, I had to be ready. And now, years later, in that cold boardroom with Madison smirking and Marcus pushing that folder toward me, I knew exactly what was about to happen. He thought he'd won, that all those late nights and silent sacrifices were his to erase with a signature. But what he didn't realize was that by signing my termination, he had activated the one clause he never saw coming. The foundation of his empire was no longer his. He handed me the pen, thinking it would end my story. He never noticed the trap had already been set. And by the time he did, it would be far too late. The next morning, before most people even poured their first cup of coffee, a shipment from Munich was halted. The message from the German partner was brief and clinical: license inactive, original architect required. Inside the executive suite, confusion turned quickly into tension. Madison walked into her first strategy meeting with a tablet in hand and a confident smile that didn't last past the first question. She confused infrastructure terms, used buzzwords out of place, and tried to laugh it off when no one else did. Marcus tried to take control, barking instructions, demanding status updates, expecting the machine to run as it always had. But the engine didn't turn. The systems that used to respond like clockwork stalled without explanation. By midday, the Canadian supply team sent an urgent request for clarification. Files were missing signatures. Access levels had shifted. No one could confirm who was authorized to make decisions anymore. The IT department, now reporting to a manager 3 levels below me, couldn't locate the source of the restriction protocols. No one even knew the fallback layers existed. Because I'd built them myself by hand late at night, over years of learning what could go wrong. Madison tried to host a second meeting that afternoon. She stumbled through a slideshow someone else had prepared. Half the department heads didn't show. The ones who did kept their cameras off and their microphones muted. Meanwhile, Marcus paced behind the tinted glass, red-faced and restless. He slammed doors, fired off emails. But the real problem couldn't be solved with volume or threats. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It wasn't hesitation or disorganization. It was the kind of silence that settles when something foundational begins to shift. When people stop looking for leadership and start bracing for collapse. And all of it was just the beginning. Just day one. One broken thread and the seams had already started to split. By the second morning, the crisis wasn't just internal anymore. A leaked memo from the logistics team in Singapore made its way to a journalist on LinkedIn. Within hours, the words "the original architect required" were trending across every business channel. The story spread faster than anyone could contain it. Screenshots of Madison's clueless remarks from yesterday's meeting surfaced side by side with clips of her Instagram captions about billion-dollar projects. The hashtag #BringBackEvelyn exploded. I watched it unfold from a cafe downtown. The clip of Marcus freezing at a press conference played on every screen, his voice caught mid-sentence when asked about the license issue. He looked small, cornered, exposed. The company's stock took a nosedive by noon. Investors started demanding emergency calls. Employees began to post anonymously about what had really happened, how the company discarded the one person who built its backbone. There were memes, brutal and brilliant. One showed Marcus with the caption, "When arrogance signs contracts, it never reads." Another showed Madison photoshopped behind a firewall locked out of her own system. Industry veterans started weighing in. Thought leaders reposted my name with phrases like irreplaceable and silent force. People I hadn't spoken to in years were tagging me in threads, saying this is what happens when you confuse loyalty with silence. Every alert, every headline, every laugh under those viral posts drove the same truth deeper into the surface. This wasn't just a systems failure. It was a reckoning. And I didn't have to say a word. I just kept sipping my coffee, watching the empire unravel in public view. The collapse had gone global. The silence was finally broken. And justice didn't shout. It just echoed. The boardroom was silent as the lead counsel projected the contract onto the screen. Clause 17 lit up in bold, unflinching text. If the original architect is removed without cause, all rights and operational control revert to her. No one moved. No one spoke. Marcus sat frozen, his jaw slack, as the lawyer confirmed that the clause had been triggered the moment he signed my termination. He tried to argue, but the words collapsed before they left his mouth. One director leaned forward and asked the question that sealed it all. You gave her everything. Was that your plan? The lawyer didn't flinch. He said the clause was legal, binding, and irreversible, that there was no path to undo what had already been done. Marcus looked around the room, hoping for support. But the same people who once applauded his confidence now stared at him with open disdain. One of them, a longtime ally, leaned back and said it plainly. You didn't just fire her. You destroyed the company. And just like that, it was over. The papers came through quietly on a Monday morning. 42 patents, all officially transferred to my name. No fine print, no conditions, just a clean and final recognition that everything I built was now mine alone. I didn't go back to the company. There was nothing left there that I needed. The badge, the office, the title, they were never the real reward. Instead, I made a list. The vendors who stood by me in the dark hours. The partners who always took my calls, not because they had to, but because they trusted me. Those were the people I called first. They didn't hesitate. Not one of them asked why. They just said, tell us when you're ready. And I was. 2 weeks later, I signed a lease on a modest space downtown. Nothing flashy. Just clean, light, solid floors and a view that reminded me to breathe. The first piece of furniture I brought in was a plain wooden desk. On top of it, I placed a plaque. Chief Architect. Not because I needed the title, because I had earned it. I called the company Haven Systems. The name wasn't accidental. I wanted it to stand for safety, clarity, and trust. Not disruption. Not chaos. There was no PR rollout, no grand launch party. Just steady phone calls, quiet meetings, and plans built on mutual respect instead of showmanship. Word spread faster than I expected. The partners I'd once pulled strings for now wanted in. They weren't chasing headlines. They were chasing reliability, something real. 3 weeks after opening my doors, I got a message from an international conglomerate. They asked if I would serve as a global innovation advisor. The role was broad, powerful, and quiet. Exactly how I liked it. I said yes, not for the prestige, but because I wanted a seat at the table where decisions were made, and not just for me, for people like me, builders, fixers, survivors. My calendar filled, but my peace grew. I didn't work through the night anymore. I made it home for dinner. I took calls on my terms. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel owned by my own success. Marcus was gone by then, resigned, disgraced. But I didn't follow the headlines. I had other things to build. And as I stood in that new office surrounded by walls that hadn't yet heard a single apology or excuse, I realized something. I hadn't just reclaimed what was mine. I had redefined what power looked like. Quiet. Steady. Earned. I used to think power had to be loud, that you had to fight, raise your voice, throw punches just to be heard. But now, I know better. Real power is quiet. It doesn't shout for attention or demand recognition. It waits. It watches. And when the moment comes, it moves without noise, without force. Just certainty. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to make a scene or burn it all down. I just had to let the truth surface. Let the systems I built speak louder than I ever could. Watching it all collapse without lifting a finger wasn't about satisfaction. It was about clarity. It was knowing I had spent years being the foundation, not the face. And in the end, foundations always decide what stays standing. I wasn't erased. I was revealed. And sometimes that's the better ending. Not the applause, not the spotlight. Just a quiet, earned peace that no one can take from you. If you've ever been overlooked, replaced, or made to feel invisible, I hope this reminds you that your value doesn't vanish just because someone fails to see it. Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that never had to yell. Tell me your story. If you've ever carried something no one thanked you for, I'd like to hear it. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And when it does, the whole room listens.